Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Sisters of Battle Preacher. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon page are linked below. Now onto the video. The first colour we're going to use is Vallejo Black. I'm going to use this to paint some of his robes and also the body of his Zealot's Vindicator. Obviously, being a scratch built miniature, this is actually made from the Champion Cawdor miniature. It's the same body that's used for the Gang Boss 2 from Necromunda. But I cut off the section that will be his crossbow and replaced that with the chainsaw blade and the little flamer bit on the top. So I wasn't too keen on the official Preacher miniatures. Next up, we're going to use Kislev Flesh to paint all of his skin. There are some other parts on this miniature too. You've got the books which come from the Grey Knights kits. We've also got his kind of backpack thing. I needed something to stand that book on, so I clipped off the backpack of one of the Genestealer Neophyte Hybrids, and stuck that on there, and used a little bit of plastic putty just to fill in any gaps on that, and also added a few little relics from different bits of kit. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Khorne Flesh. Use this to paint the section of cloth in the middle between his legs there, which I'm going to paint up as though it's a large piece of parchment. Also, you've got the skull, you've got the little kind of bandages around his legs, you've got plenty of parchments, the pages of the books, that kind of thing. The actual book in front here, where it's got the skull on top of it, I will be painting that green later on in the video. It's actually painted up red initially, but then I thought there was too much red on the miniature, so changed the front one to green to make it stand out a little bit better. The next colour is Citadel Retributor Armour. This is just to paint up some of the little details. We're also going to be painting up the little sections at the front of the flamer. Bits that look like little windows on the flamer there. Some of the details on the sword, and some of the little details like the winged skull on the piece of parchment on his back, the corners of the books, that sort of thing. Next up is Citadel Leadbelcher. I'm going to use this to do the teeth on the chainsword, or the Vindicator, also any other little bits of metal on it. So you've got parts on the handle, parts of the bracket that's holding the book on, the little bits surrounding the skull by his feet, sections of the flamer, going to use a little bit of Vallejo white now. Going to use this to paint up all of the flames which are on top of the candles. The reason we're painting all these white is because we're just going to use some shades to colour them in a little bit later, so you get them a nice bright white colour. That will make the shades stand out a lot. Next up, we are using Citadel Tallarn Sand to paint the rope which he's got going around his neck and a little bit around his waist too. You want to make sure you get this into all the grooves, because there's some quite deep grooves in there. As I say, I wasn't too keen on the official Games Workshop Preachers. They've probably got some new ones coming out in the future, I would have thought, because the old ones are getting on a little bit now. But I wanted someone who looked a bit crazy and a bit wild, like a bit of a mad zealot, to fit in with the rest of the sisters. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Baneblade Brown. I'm going to use this to do like the straps on his boots, and the straps on the Vindicator. So yeah, once I have one who looked as crazy as the rest of them, with an army that are the zealots that they are, using penitence engines and the arco-flagellants and stuff like that, I thought that the Preacher will be less like the usual ones Will be a little bit more crazed looking. I use some Vallejo Model Air Chrome. This is going to be used to paint a few of the little details, and also this sword blade, which is going down the back of the book. Now some Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to use this to paint up all of the candles, and also all of the body where you might have other colours over it. So like touching up this little bit where you got the plastic putty over the Gene Stealer backpack. Then touch up the robes and stuff like that, so you've got them all a nice uniform Mephiston Red. First shade we're going to use is Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this to paint all of the skulls, all of the parchments. Pretty much everything that is painted with Citadel Rakarth Flesh. As I say, the book at the front there will be getting painted up as though it's going to be red. So you'll see how it's painted up red, and then a bit later you'll see it getting painted up green as well, start to finish, so depending on which colour you prefer, you can paint it the red or the green. Because he's got quite a lot of the red on his robes and his clothing, I thought the green book would stand out a little bit better. Now I'm going to use a little bit of snakebite leather contrast. This is going to be used on the leather straps, on his boots, and that kind of thing. I really do rate this contrast. There's a lot of good colours in there, but the snakebite leather, the black Templar and the apothecary white are all absolutely superb colours to use. Now we're going to use Citadel Khorne Crimson, and we are going to use this to paint up the candles. I'm going to use Citadel Reichland Flesh Shade. We're going to use this just to colour in his skin. We've also used the Khorne Crimson on the little like armour plates. He's got one on his chest and also on his shins as well. So you can give them a dose of Khorne Crimson too. Next up, Citadel Agrax Earth Shade. I'm going to use this to paint up all of the gold. Also use it to paint or shade the rope. If you want to, you can use it to darken up some of the metallics too. Not too sure he'd be keeping all his gear as clean as maybe the Sisters or Marines would do. So you can use this to grime them up a little bit as well. Now a little bit of Fugan Orange here. Just painting these little panels that we painted with the Retributor armour earlier on. That's just to give them a slight orangey glow there. Now a little bit of Cassandora yellow. I'm going to use this just to paint all of the flames. Like so. Now Citadel Druchii Violet, we're going to use this to do the rest of the red. So you've got the books and his robes. As I say, if you want to paint that front book, or indeed the back book green, there'll be books being painted those colours a little bit later on in this video. Like so. Now I'm going to use Citadel Nuln Oil, and that's going to be to do all of the silvery metallics. Not really too many of them on this miniature. That'll dull down the metallics quite nicely. Like so. Next, Citadel Mephiston Red. We're going to start reapplying some of the colour back to his armour plates. So he's got these like kind of ridged armour plates and stuff. So we're going to be going with the Mephiston, the Evil Sunz, and then the Squig orange on these ones. We're going to do his robes the same colour that I do the Sisters of Battle armour. Now we'll just break up the colours and make those reds ever so slightly different. And pick out the details on these with the Mephiston Red. Then we're going to work on Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet to highlight those. With the highlights, you want to think about where the light's going to catch them, and only highlight those areas. This is a miniature where it really does start to come together once you've started putting these actual colours back on it. Because the shades and the lot of red on it, it doesn't really distinguish it too much, so once you've shaded it, it looks a bit bland and a bit all red, but with the different reds, it does set it off a little bit. So we're going to be using Citadel Squig Orange here just to do a final edge highlight to all these little armour plates. Now we're going to use some Citadel Khorne Red, and we're going to start reapplying the red to his robes. You want to think about where the light's going to be catching these and leaving the shades in the recesses. You can also use the Khorne Red to do the leather cover of any of the red books too. Next up, we're going to use some Citadel Wazdakka Red. We're going to use this on the purity seals. Again, there's going to be using a lot of reds, and we will use different reds on them. But it will make them all look slightly different, so they don't just all blend into one. Finally, for the purity seals and the books, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror. Just do the final highlights to those. So with the Pink Horror, you want to be picking out the details on the books. All those edges for the edge highlights too. Just make sure those details and stuff stand out. So going back onto his robes now, so we've already done the Khorne Red on the robes. We're now going to be doing the Citadel Mephiston Red. So this is the section which is the same colour as the Sisters of Battle armour. So I'm doing the Order of the Wounded Heart, and this is how I'm doing the armour for them. Doing Khorne Red, followed by Mephiston Red. Then we have Wazdakka Red, and then final edge highlights with Squig Orange. At the moment we're just adding the Mephiston Red to the robes. That'll help them stand out. You'll also see that it's showing as a different colour red to the armour plates and also the leather books and the purity seals. So now doing a little bit of Wazdakka Red over the Mephiston Red. This just lightens it up just that little bit, gives it more of a kind of pinky look rather than the bright orangey look that you get if you were using, say, Evil Sunz Scarlet or something like that. And you want to build up those edges that be catching the most light so that they will be getting lighter and lighter, so you have the shades in the recesses and the lighter colours on all the top edges and the top surfaces that be catching the most light. With the Wazdakka Red finished, we're now going to add a little bit of Squig Orange just to do some very extreme edge highlights on the robes. Now if you look at the candles there, you have the Wazdakka Red has been put onto the candles as well to give them the lighter shade. We'll be coming back to highlight those in a moment. Because the amount of different reds that I've used on different sections, I'll put up a list of what reds I'm using on each section just so you can see. But with this Squig Orange, that's the final layer for his robes. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Pink Horror. We're going to use this on the candles just to put the final highlight on those. I do like doing the Wazdakka Red and then Pink Horror on the candles because it does give it that melted wax look, the way you get that lighter shade of the wax candle colour. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Kislev flesh on this slightly overexposed bit of footage. You're just going to reapply some of the skin tone, leaving the Reikland flesh shade in the recesses. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white to the Kislev flesh. So we're just going to be adding this shade to the higher areas of skin that will be catching the light, so they'll be a little bit lighter. Using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush here to paint on the details, try and get them looking a little bit nicer. Next up, I'm going to use some Citadel Rakkarth flesh. I'm going to start reapplying colours to the parchments and also the kind of bandages that I'm doing around his arms. So this little bit I think is meant to be like a little plate of armour bolted onto the side of his boot on the original miniature, but I've taken off the bolts and things. I'm just doing that as a little parchment that's stuck to his leg. Now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo white, mix that with the Rakkarth flesh. We're just going to start highlighting the pages and parchments and also those bandages on his arms too. So you do want to be thinking about where the light's catching these and highlighting the areas that are the highest on them, where they'd be catching the most light. I'm going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. We're just going to highlight those parchments on the pages of the books. I'm trying to pick out the tops of the pages there because they'd be catching the light a little bit more. Highlighting the bottom edges of all the little symbols and stuff on the pages too. I'm going to use some Citadel Tallarn sand. We're just going to go around and pick up all the little individual sections of the rope to make those stand out. As always, there's a couple of little patches where it looks a lot smoother than the rest. You have to forgive me for twisting this around quite a bit because it's sometimes tricky to work out which is the best angle to paint it at. We want to rotate the miniature so you can reach it in the easiest way possible and just highlight each of those sections of the rope. Next up, a little bit of Citadel Ushabti bone. I'm going to paint the little sections of skull with this. Just highlight those that we reapplied the Ricard flesh to previously. Okay, so we've got a brief interlude on painting the bone here. We're going to use some Citadel Warpstone Glow, which is the same colour used for the eye lenses on the Order of the Wounded Heart. And we are going to repaint this book at the bottom so it's green. It'll give a nice contrast to the red of the robes and the armour pieces on the preacher. So just give that a nice smooth coat of Warpstone Glow. We can get on with shading that. Then once we finish this book, we'll return to highlighting the skulls. So next up, we're going to shade it using Citadel BL Tan Green. Just want to give that a reasonable coat of that so it darkens all the recesses. Also doing the cover of the top book green as well, just to make that stand out a little bit more, as there was just a bit too much red on this. The greens will help break it up a little bit from whichever direction you're looking at it. So the shade's dry, we're now going to reapply some Warpstone Glow. What we're doing when reapplying this is, rather than giving it a nice smooth coat, other than working it around the edges of the symbols on the book, I'll be kind of adding it in an almost a mottled way, kind of poking and prodding the paint on rather than just doing smooth brush strokes, and that'll give it that kind of mottled leathery effect. Now I'm going to add a little bit of Vallejo white to the Warpstone Glow. We're just going to start highlighting the two books. You want to make sure you get the underside of all the ridges and things like that to make those stand out. Then you're going to work on the kind of same mottling that you did with the previous layer. Just sort of like spotting that and prodding that into place on the areas that will be getting the most light. Going to add a final little bit of Vallejo white to the previous mix. We're just going to do some edge highlights on those letters and on the symbols and stuff to get them to stand out, and also on the edges of the books and any of the little ridges and details just to make those stand out. Now going back to Ushabti Bone, I'm going to add a little bit of white to the Ushabti Bone and just finish highlighting these skulls. Just want to be painting this on the ridges and the details to make those edges stand out so that you can see them quite clearly. This will be the areas where the light will be catching the bone, like so. Now we're going to start working on the gold, so we're going to use some Citadel Retributor armour. I'm just going to reapply this to the areas we put the gold on before. Obviously not the inside of the flamer bit that we shaded with the Fugan orange. Any of the little details and decorations that we painted with the Retributor armour, I'm going to repaint them, leaving the shades in the recesses and also making sure that you don't put the Retributor armour on the undersides of any of the gold parts. Just leave the shade in there so you will have that dulled and dark gold there. So to highlight the gold, I'm going to use Citadel Liberator gold. You want to think about where the light is going to be catching all these gold areas and highlighting them accordingly. So you want to think about where it's going to reflect a little bit more, so you're going to have a little bit more on the edges or maybe flat surfaces that will be catching more of the light coming down from above. Like so. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome with the Liberator Gold. We're just going to start doing some highlights on the areas where we've just put the Liberator Gold. So this is mainly just going to be for edges and corners and things like that. You can just bring out the details and make them really stand out as they are catching the light. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to use this to highlight the areas where we used the snakebite leather earlier on. So you have the boots, you also have some of the straps and the leather straps on his Vindicator. I'm just using a little bit of Citadel Avalanche Sunset here. Just a few little spots that we're putting inside these little bits that we highlighted with the Fugan orange earlier on. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Dawn Yellow just to do the same again, just to add some little bright spots of yellow within those little bits there. And there's a few ways you can do this. I did it on some heavy flamers using just the whole of it was painted with Model Air Chrome. Then I used Cassandora Yellow and then just used a little bit of Fugan Orange to go around the outsides. So basically as long as you've got some flame coloured colours in there, sort of oranges and yellows, that'll look fine. So now using Citadel Leadbelcher, I'm just going to reapply a little bit of shine to some of the areas where we dulled it down with Nuln Oil earlier on. And I'll just bring the shine back to it and make those little bits stand out. Look as though it's at least been slightly maintained. Now I'm going to use some Vallejo Black. We're going to start reapplying the black to the robes over his shoulders and also the body of his Vindicator. Just get this the nice flat black colour so we can start working on the highlights. Now let's highlight these areas. We're going to be using a little bit of Vallejo German Grey. You just want to be going over all the areas that be catching the light, any ridges or big smooth areas where the light's going to be catching on top of it. Like so. And finally, to highlight the grey or the black, we are going to use Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. This is going to be used more like an edge highlight. So just using this kind of like edge highlights to pick out the creases and the top edges of things to make those stand out a little bit more. Also, you'll be running this along the edges and corners on the body of the Vindicator 2. Just to get all those edges and stuff standing out. Final colour we're going to use is a little bit of Citadel Black Templar contrast, also a little bit of Blood Angels Red contrast, and a little bit of Orc Flesh contrast. Now I'm going to be using the red and the green, or the Blood Angels Red and the Orc Flesh, to do some colours on the scroll work and all the purity seals and the books and things like that. And we're going to be using the Black Templar to add the script and the general writing on these areas. So once you've put in the letters, you're then going to be doing little horizontal lines to represent the script on there, and you're just going to be using the colours to do little important letters here and there. So this is the finished Preacher. Really happy with how he turned out. He's going to look class within the army and something a little bit different among all the sisters.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much.
If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, the Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.